So you got to remember, 95%, 96% of every inmate in prison right now in America is coming home. People don't realize that. These people are coming home either way. So they can either come home with the opportunity to reclaim the American dream, or they can come home to nothing and commit more crimes and victimize more people, right? That's the choices as a society we have to make.
John Koufos, so great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Good to be with you.
You are actually a former inmate.
That's right.
So this isn't just academic to you.
True. I've lived it.
Tell me, first of all, tell me your story.
Sure.
And then we'll talk about Right on Crime, which is this initiative that you're so deeply involved in.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I grew up, I'll give you the fast childhood version.
Yeah.
I grew up, my father was a federal prisoner, and he escaped from federal prison at one point, actually,
Okay.
federal custody.
Okay.
And my mom was a teenage mom, so we were in poverty, very, very difficult upbringing. The way I compensated for that was, about 15, I started drinking very heavily. But I was a completely functional alcoholic. So I ended up going to college, getting a master's degree. I go to a top-tier law school. And I spent the first 10 years of my career as a criminal defense lawyer in New Jersey. I tried murders, racketeerings, very complicated cases, did a lot of wiretap cases, and had all the trappings of success. To the outside world, it is.
Okay.
The inside world, I was this guy who would come home right after court, and if I had no files to work up, start to get drunk, right? In 2011, I was driving drunk, as I did all the time, actually. Only this time I hit somebody. And I tried to lie my way out of it. And thank the good Lord, I didn't kill that person. They lived. They would go on to recover. When I came off the bender, I would turn myself in. And that would start my road to sobriety. And that road would take me squarely through the New Jersey Department of Corrections as an inmate. I really had a spiritual failing. And, I used to blame that childhood I just talked to you about. I used to blame God for all of that. It was always God's fault. I got this lousy deal in life. Of course, all the trials I won, I never gave God any credit. That was all John. And when I finally, it took that life-changing event, and not just life-changing for me, life-changing for this poor person I hurt, for me to finally get it together. I would be indicted. I'd argue my last case in 2012. It was actually, It was in before the New Jersey Supreme Court, actually. I had a big search and seizure case. I finished that case. We won that case, actually. And then I would plead guilty and go off to prison a couple months later. I was sentenced to 6 years in New Jersey's prison system. I was put in this place, Bayside State Prison, which was the prison that my clients were afraid to go to. So you could tell when I got that transfer paper, I was about as white as this shirt. But I kept my faith strong. I kept my sobriety strong. Well, God helped me keep my sobriety strong. And after 17 months, the parole board, in a shock to me, decided to parole me. I certainly didn't think I was going to get paroled. However, I had no house anymore. I was bankrupt, had no law license. So I moved in with a law school roommate. He took me in, and I had a job at a company because I had friends, right? But when I was in prison, I want to tell you something. Nobody asked me for money, which was really surprising to me. But everybody asked me for a job. All my inmates, other cellmates, other inmates on the yard said, John, when we get out on the streets, can you help me find a job? I want to be with my daughter. I want to pay my child support. I want to come back to the criminal life. And I never forgot that. So I get out of prison. I'm in the northern part of New Jersey now, a place called Hoboken, New Jersey, which, for anyone who knows New Jersey, is not really where a drunk goes to get sober. It's a party town. But wherever they make a joke, wherever there's a lot of drunks, there's a lot of good sobriety, good recovery. Had a great network there. Had a chance meeting with a former governor of New Jersey, Jim McGreevey, who was doing county jail ministry. Governor McGreevey wanted to see reentry programs developed in New Jersey. He asked me what I thought about it. I said, I want to solve one thing, Jim. What I want to do is I want to make sure that people are not put in prison for poverty, in the sense that we saw people in Bayside State Prison go out to the halfway house, go out on parole, but still owe $100 in fines, $200 in fines, not have an ID, and they'd be sent right back on a technical violation. As a lawyer, I knew I could fix that. Or as a former lawyer, I knew I could fix that.
Okay.
Right?
Very interesting.
So I said to Jim, I said, listen, I don't drink anymore, but I have all these old drinking buddies. I said, if I want them to hang out with me, I got to find something to do. We're going to build the biggest driver's license restoration program for the reentry population the country's ever seen. And we did. I took 70 pro bono lawyers, connected them by a single cloud-based case management system. Think of like the poor man's Uber for lawyers. And we restored over 400 driver's licenses in the 3 years I was there. We obtained thousands of pieces of identity documents, tens of thousands of dollars in fines, and thousands of warrants wiped out. That meant in New Jersey, people were able to get into the unions. They're becoming carpenters, electricians, laborers, living wage jobs, reunifying with their families.
So it's basically just dealing with the technicalities and like some sort of small fine that they
so
just didn't have.
That was one part of it, right?
Yeah.
So there's many issues to reentry, but that was how I got my start.
Okay.
So what happened was Jim took me to see Chris Christie, who was our governor at the time.
Right.
And Governor Christie was doing a lot of great stuff in the opioid, in response to the opioid epidemic.
Okay.
And they wanted to create a bit more reentry services for people. So they asked me to help design a nonprofit and design it. I helped them design a nonprofit. Jim McGreevey was our chairman. We had 5 former governors on the board, a former Supreme Court justice, called the New Jersey Reentry Corporation.
Okay.
And what we did was we ended up building them, the 3 years I was there, 9 locations. We went from 0 to 9 locations. We went from me, Jim, and a social worker named Shay Callie to 62 employees. And we helped thousands of people across New Jersey reclaim their lives. And we did it by looking at the key social determinants in this issue. So we talked about ID, fines, fees, driver's license.
Right.
That's one big issue. Housing, massive problem. There's no housing for this population, and even where it does exist, you have to somehow connect them. Workforce development is obvious, right? You have to connect people to training services or apprenticeship programs to get a job. And then medical treatment and behavioral health. I link those together as well. In this age of medication-assisted treatment, Vivitrol, buprenorphine, Suboxone, to combat the opioid epidemic, you need to link your doctors with your behavioral health and addiction treatment specialists.
Fascinating.
So we built a hub and spoke model in New Jersey.
Okay.
I always joke with Governor McGreevey when I talk to him, because now he has my job. He was the chairman, now he's the president and chairman, CEO and chairman. So I said, Jim, you're the second best executive director this agency's ever had, but he's been a transformative force in New Jersey. Governor Christie was a transformative force in New Jersey. And then I was asked to come down to D.C. to work at Right on Crime, to do this, to help build policy nationally. So I'll tell you, it's not easy to get on the camera and tell the worst couple days of your life, or the worst time of your life to people, but if it helps anyone out there think about addiction that they might be going through, or that someone else in their family might be going through, it's worth it. And I'll tell you one other thing. I can't build a time machine to go back and not hit that person. I can't. So the next best thing I can do is build systems that intervene. Because if we do the proper interventions, criminal justice reform, reentry, if these interventions work today, we save tomorrow's victim. That's what this is about.
Very, very interesting. So it's kind of like you took what you did at this reentry and you just took it to the next level.
Yeah.
To kind of try to do something almost preventative, basically.
Right, good. So you got to remember, 95%, 96% of every inmate in prison right now in America is coming home. People don't realize that. These people are coming home either way. So they can either come home with the opportunity to reclaim the American dream, or they can come home to nothing and commit more crimes and victimize more people, right? That's the choices as a society we have to make. And as I found myself, my first day on the job, I was brought to a meeting at the White House, and we're in 17, and we started talking about these issues. And I was moved with Jared Kushner's leadership on this issue, and eventually the president obviously passed the First Step Act, or signed the First Step Act. And, that created inertia and a ripple effect to red states around the country. They're now following what the president did. But when I look back at my life, right, it's a It's a story that's only funny in New Jersey, that I never knew a single politician until I was a felon. Right? In New Jersey, maybe that's how it always is, but I'm kidding. But it proves that when you're living right, the right things seem to happen. Right? When you're trying to be a person of service, good things seem to happen. And I'll tell you, I'm so blessed. I met President Trump a number of times. I was in the Oval Office with him when the First Step Act was signed. I met President Obama in Newark, New Jersey, at one of our partner addiction treatment partners. And I met governors and worked with governors all over this country. I got a wife now, got a 7-month-old baby daughter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
All of those things, and I've done all the best things in my life have happened with a criminal record, if you can imagine that. But I'll tell you, this is an exciting time to be in criminal justice reform. This is maybe the only bipartisan issue we have left in this country. It's one thing that we all agree needs to be fixed. And you see in states like Texas, where Right on Crime, obviously it's headquartered in Austin, Texas. Yeah. Texas, who by the way, no one's going to accuse of being soft on crime, right? We know that. Texas has closed 8 prisons, or closing 2 more in the last 10 years.
Right.
They saved billions, with a B, $4 billion, and the crime rate's better than it's ever been. Right? They did that with smart criminal justice reform. Remember, Texas doesn't have mandatory minimums like many other states, where there's no discretion in sentencing and you're locked up forever. Right? They don't have all of that. Now, of course, they will give you 99 years for something, and they obviously have a very utilized death penalty in Texas.
Right.
But all of that gives Texas the credibility to other conservative states, because if it can work in Texas, right, in a state that is clearly conservative, clearly a law and order state, then other states can pick that up, and you're seeing that effect around the country.
No, it's remarkable. Actually, we had Brooke Rollins, who headed up Texas.
She signed my hiring letter. I know Brooke.
Right. So we had her on the show a little while ago, and of course, we know that her work, with the Texas Public Policy.
Yep, that's our parent organization. Yes.
Right, has contributed to these efforts as well. So, what do you make of the pardons that the president has made, and how does that impact the work that you're trying to do? Sure.
So, a couple things, just as an overarching point. It is very rare to see a first-term governor or president exercise his or her power of clemency in the first term. Typically, it's been around, when a governor is like 28 seconds before he or she's leaving, right, either not terming out or not reelected, a slew of pardons happens, or a slew of commutations happen, right? So as a threshold point, those governors and the president who are doing clemency in their first term should be applauded for doing it in the first place. And that's really important to your viewers and the people out there, because if more governors and presidents in our time were willing to use this, we wouldn't have to wait until the end of a term to see justice reform. Now, getting down to the issue itself. So, clemency, federal clemency, is a presidential prerogative, meaning the president can do it with or without anyone's consent.
Right.
Now, it's different in other states. In Pennsylvania, there's a board of pardons. In Florida, there's other restrictions on it. New Jersey probably closely aligns with the federal system as far as how the pardon commutation process works, just so you understand. So the viewers understand. So when you think about this, the current federal system has about 14,000 pardons backlogged. Let me explain how the pardon process works. Clemency process works federally. You file your application with the Department of Justice.
Okay.
Now, when you want to talk about a monopoly, the Department of Justice are the U.S. Attorney's offices that put you away. They run the prison systems. The Bureau of Prisons is part of the Department of Justice, which is not how it is in any state in this country.
Okay.
Department of Corrections is its own cabinet in every state. It's its own agency. It's never a part of an Attorney General's office.
I see.
So prosecutors put you away, their prison houses you, and then they get to decide if your application goes out to the White House to get clemency granted.
Fascinating.
So that, I'm not saying it's a rigged system, but that's a whole lot of cards against somebody, right? That's a lot of needles to thread. So
it's not just a president just picking someone that they want? There's this whole deep. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating.
So the traditional, let me go.
Yeah.
So the traditional pathway is what I just described. A president or a governor in certain states can pick someone. They could read about him in the paper, a president paper, and say that's unfair. Call their governor's council and say, get me so and so's file. We're going to grant him or her clemency. Right. That's what President Trump is doing, is deciding who he wants to pardon and grant clemency to, with input from the Department of Justice, but not always going through the Justice's Department of Justice bureaucracy.
Okay.
What I think we're going to see, the net effect of this is going to be very positive for this country, because this is triggering a conversation on clemency reform. So whether you were on the left or the right, what you wanted in the country is you want a fair clemency process. And if the Department of Justice is the gatekeeper, you want them to be the gatekeeper, but move the files along, right? Don't hold the files, don't slow walk the files, don't sit on the files. Make sure the files have to get where they have to get in some sort of system. What the president has done with these commutations is made sure that people understand this process is going to change one way or another. Either the process is going to get better on the DOJ end, or he's going to keep doing what he's doing, or both. Now, one of the things we should remember, because the media sort of only mentioned Rod Blagojevich and Michael Milken and Bernie Kerik and David Safavian were linchpins of the criminal justice movement and the First Step Act, right? But people forget about Crystal Munoz, Judith Negron, Tyneese Hall, Alice Marie Johnson, who was the original one. I think who I have the pleasure of being very close friends with and working with. These are people who were forgotten, right? They're forgotten. And if the president didn't take notice, these people would have died in prison or come out as old ladies. And I think that, do we have to do better on clemency reform in this country, top to bottom? Yes. Federally, do we have to get a process that is a little more uniform? Yes. But how are we ever going to get that process? I mean, the Department of Justice isn't just going to say, we're just going to do it differently now. Now they have the impetus to act because the president has shown very clearly commutations are within his purview.
That's fascinating. I didn't know what I was getting into when I asked this question.
It's a lot more. It's a lot more complicated than people think. And I think that issue where the Bureau of Prisons is part of the Department of Justice, again, it's such a unique issue. Think about it. The Attorney General appoints a Director of Corrections. In every state in the country, the governor appoints the Director of Corrections, right? So, and it's a completely separate agency. And in some states, parole is an even separate agency. Yeah. So, I mean, here you have everything under one house. So the same people who put the cuffs on you, the FBI, and prosecute you, the U.S. Attorney's Office, house you, and then one day have to decide if you're going to get clemency. Well, when you got sentenced, I'm sure they didn't write, this person's a great person, don't sentence them harshly. They wrote, this person is whatever we think they are. They're not just going to abandon that position when someone applies for clemency.
So let's just finish up with the First Step Act.
Sure.
Obviously this landmark legislation was passed, to some criticism and of course also to some acclaim. How have things shaken out now, and what are the big things that need to be fixed up?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, the First Step Act, make no mistake, was the most consequential criminal justice reform in the federal system we've seen in a generation. It reversed so many things in the old Clinton crime bill of '94 they talked about that decimated African American communities. This month, February 2020, the United States Sentencing Commission issued a report on the First Step Act on the number of releases that have come out because of this law. It's a few thousand people.
Yeah.
91% African American. That tells you who was harmed, right? And now who is being at least remedied. What needs to happen going forward are now things that the White House has really put their weight behind, which are connectivity to jobs and services. What you're seeing is initiatives like the Ready to Work initiative inside the Bureau of Prisons, where employers could call the Bureau of Prisons and say, we have a need for machinists in Wichita. Can you tell us who's returning to Wichita with that skill, or can you help get that skill? So people are able to connect earlier. There's job fairs happening behind the wall. you're seeing people get ID for the first time coming out of prison.
Right.
That's a small part of the First Step Act.
Right.
And of course, we saw I forget the exact number, but in the president's budget, there's a significant amount of money behind it. So I've seen nothing but commitment. I'll tell you this: as I mentioned, I was in the Oval Office when it was signed. I had the opportunity to chat with the president for a few minutes afterwards and some other senior White House officials, and I thanked them for being there. I never thought a person in my situation would have the opportunity to be in the Oval Office touching the Resolute desk. And they said, "Okay, you're welcome. It's time to implement it. We're going to look for yours and many advocates' help in implementation." And I was moved by that, because sometimes people just pass a law just to pass a law. Say, look, we passed the law. Isn't that a great accomplishment? The White House I dealt with is a lot more interested in the results for, I think, the forgotten men and women in this country than just passing the law. So the ink wasn't even dry, and they were talking about implementation. That's commitment. And for a person like me, whose whole life revolves around this stuff, that's what keeps the engine running.
Well, John Koufos, such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. We'll see you soon.